A long, long time ago, I can still remember how that music used to make me smile. And I knew if I had my chance, I could make those people dance, and then maybe they'd be happy for a while. But February made me shiver with every paper I deliver. Bad news on the doorstep. I couldn't take one more step. I can't remember if I cried when I read about his widowed bride. Something touched me deep inside the day the music died. So bye-bye, Miss American Pie. Drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry. Good old boys were drinking whiskey and rye, singing, "This'll be the day that I die. This'll be the day that I die." Did you write the book of love, and do you have faith in God above? If the Bible tells you so. Now do you believe in rock and roll? Can music save your mortal soul? And can you teach me how to dance real slow? Well, I know that you're in love with him, 'cause I saw you dancing in the gym. You both kicked off your shoes. Man, I dig those rhythm and blues. I was a lonely teenage ronking buck with a pink carnation and a pickup truck, but I knew that I was out of luck the day that the music died. We started singing bye-bye, Miss American Pie. Drove my Chevy to the levee was dry. And good old boys were drinking whiskey and rye, singing, "This'll be the day that I die. This'll be the day that I die." Yeah, for 10 years we've been on our own. Moss grows fat on a rolling stone, but that's not how it used to be. When the jester sang for the king and queen in a coat he borrowed from James Dean, and a voice that came from you and me. Oh, and while the king was looking down, the jester stole his thorny crown. The courtroom was adjourned. No verdict was returned. And while Lenin read a book on Marx, the quartet practiced in the park, and we sang dirges in the dark the day that the music died.
This country, in 15 or 20 years' time, the black man will have the whip hand over the white man.
It's a speech which, 50 years on, still rears its head when the topic of immigration is raised. On the 20th of April 1968, the Conservative MP Enoch Powell spoke against mass immigration at the party's political centre in Birmingham, in what is known as the Rivers of Blood speech. The speech was critical of the Race Relations Bill, which later that year became an Act of Parliament. The new legislation made it illegal to refuse housing, employment and public services to people on the basis of race. Powell believed it would be used to discriminate against the established white population. Reaction to the speech was swift, with party leader Edward Heath removing Powell from his post as Shadow Defence Secretary, citing the speech's inflammatory nature and the risk of damage to race relations. Only 4 years later, the Wolverhampton MP had left the party in protest at the government's decision to take Britain into the then European Economic Community. The Rivers of Blood speech is also linked with the increase in hostility and violence towards immigrants and coincided with the formation and rise of the far-right National Front Party. Although Powell sought a moderate approach to the issue of immigration, the language he used appealed to the ethnic nationalist and racial separatist views of the NF.
Do you feel that any of the support for him may be because people feel that he was standing up and speaking his mind, rightly or wrongly, when so many politicians are felt to be mealy-mouthed on these controversial issues?
I think that he was, in fact, backed precisely because he appealed to the fear and the insecurity which has led to a deterioration in the relations between the races. I think this is demagogy and not leadership.
For some, Powell articulated the fears of millions of Britons who felt ignored by their elected representatives. For others, the speech was an incitement to racial hatred which pandered to ill-informed populist feeling.
I guess the immigration issue was the thing, as you know, that changed your life and made your name probably better known throughout the world than it had been before that. And when you made a speech, as a result of which you were called a racist by many of your own papers and many in the States who reported it. And it's easy to see reading the speech why you could be called that. Do you understand why people call you a racist?
It is one of the modern terms of abuse. And the term of abuse is the more effective, the less defined it is. Then you can throw it at anybody and anything. But I find this word race very irrelevant in the British context. Indeed, it's rather a word which we've borrowed from America, because in the States, the term race simply means Negro or non-Negro. Now, that, of course, is the form in which this sort of conflict or potential conflict primarily presents itself in the United States. But that's a very different background, a very different origin from the problem which we have here. I wonder if you'd allow me a minute or two to sketch in the background here in Britain, because it is unique in the world, and one gets it wrong if one imports ideas from anywhere else. You've got to go back to the fact that alone of all the countries in the world, we never had a definition of ourselves. There was never such a thing as a United Kingdom citizen. Unlike the United States, which has its own citizenship, France, Germany, we never had that. We were British subjects. We were subjects of the king or the queen, as the case might be. Consequently, as the British dominions expanded, automatically everybody was born in or belonged to any part of the British dominions. Hundreds of millions of human beings were all British subjects. And in the law of this country, there was never any distinction between one British subject and another. There was no way of labeling the British subject who, if I may use the word, belonged to this country. Now, this was, had many advantages when Britain was the center of an empire. And if the numbers from the rest of the empire who availed themselves of this identification remained small, then no problem arose. But the rest of the empire had its own citizenships. An Englishman wasn't allowed to go and settle in India or Jamaica. On the contrary, they had their own very strict demarcations and definitions. And now, after the Second World War, there was a big technical revolution that took place, and that was air travel, which made the movement of masses of people from one continent to another possible on a scale which had never been contemplated before. As a result of that, there moved into the United Kingdom growing numbers of British subjects from the rest of the, well, it was by now the Commonwealth, it had ceased to be the empire, who had no other connection than that with this country, with the United Kingdom. Now, it wasn't that this was asked for. It wasn't that these people were brought in as labor, like the movement of labor on the continent. It happened because without a major change in our law, it couldn't be prevented. Indeed, it couldn't be seen. You see, we actually don't know how many came in, because if they're all British subjects, You only counted, well, you didn't count British subjects. And a Hong Kong Chinese, or a Pathan from the northwest frontier, or myself coming back from a weekend in Paris, we were all the same going through the port of entry or Heathrow Airport. Well, eventually reality breaks through. And in 1962, at last, the law was changed so as to make a difference between the British subjects who belong to this country and those who don't. But by the time that that had happened, I'm simplifying, so large a number had already settled here, plus the inflow in the years after 1962, for reasons which I won't enter into, they are complicated, that we now know that unless some drastic change happens, large parts of many of our cities will, by the beginning of the next century, be occupied by a population which has nothing in common with the people of this country. That unless some drastic change happens, large parts of many of our cities will, by the beginning of the next century, be occupied by a population which has nothing in common with the people of this country.